Welcome back to our live stream, a short history of Chinese ceramics, 5 objects in 5 days. Today is day 4. Yesterday we discussed the Ming Dynasty. Today we will talk about and tell you all about the Kangxi period and Emperor Kangxi. For the record, we are now coming to the Qing Dynasty, the last dynasty in China, and Emperor Kangxi is the second emperor who ruled from 1662 until 1722. We use the emperor's name to indicate a period.
The Qing started in the middle of the 17th century, and they took over from the Ming. They were Manchus. Manchus were a tribe from the north, and they slowly but surely took over the power from a failing Ming dynasty. Now the interesting thing is only 2% of the Chinese population was Manchu, and still they managed to gain power as emperor. So the emperor, and especially Kangxi, was really clever. He was like a chameleon. He kept his Manchu roots, and he loved his hunting and his outdoor pursuits, but he also managed to sort of assimilate into this traditional Chinese world which he now ruled. So the Han Chinese literati, and he took over a lot of their knowledge about writing and all sorts of other. He was really learned, and he was really curious as well. So he learned, and he managed to sort of place himself, and he gained a lot of respect.
Kangxi and the Kangxi period, I think, is one of my favorite, if not my favorite period of Chinese porcelain. I think this is due of the fact that I'm European, Dutch, the Dutch East India Company, my aunt and uncle who taught me all about Kangxi porcelain. Kangxi himself was a universal man, and a fascinating man. He could ride a horse, he would educate his own children, he was good in politics, warfare. He was a great lover of Chinese porcelain.
He was, and he was also the longest ruling emperor, 61 years in total. He was 5 when he came to the throne, and only 15 when he came to a still fairly shaky power. And he actually had to wage 8 years of war, sort of like war, to gain full control of the empire.
Yes, Kangxi was very clever, as I said. He was also great amateur and interested in the porcelain factories in the city of Yingtiqing, which we told you about yesterday. And before he got started in the production of Chinese porcelain, he did a survey, did an investigation, and he came up with 2 new ideas about porcelain production and the management around the factories. A was that if you worked in the factory, you got paid. Before it was sort of slave's job, but now it was a proper salary. And the most clever of all is that he appointed like a CEO, a director. And this way there was much more control, the management was better, the production went up, and the great period of Chinese porcelain production during Kangxi could start.
Yes, and it was not only the larger production, but also the innovation of techniques. So there was space and demand for new types of products and new types of glazing. And this was also fired up by the techniques and workshops in Beijing itself, in the Forbidden City, which experimented. But perhaps this is a good moment to start with the first object.
Before we start, I would just want to point out that the Kangxi period is also an important period for Europe. Right. And the production of Chinese porcelain, a lot was bought and traded by the Dutch East India Company, the VOC in Holland. We ordered it, bought it in China, sailed it back to the Netherlands and sold it off into Europe. And this started a chinoiserie, a taste for China, for Asia in Europe. And to picture you the period we're in Europe, it's the period of Louis XIV, the Sun King, in France.
Who wasn't a great collector
No.
of Chinese porcelain?
But the biggest
Funnily
collector in Europe was the Elector of Saxony in Dresden, who was also the King of Poland, Augustus the Strong. And if you go to Dresden today, you can still see his fascination for Chinese porcelain. Especially, he was convinced that owning and showing porcelain, it showed your power in the world. Maybe this is a good moment to go to the object
Yes,
garden.
I think so.
The first object we would like to talk to you about is this porcelain mountain. Of course, made during this Kangxi period, circa 1700, 1710. It is called enamel on biscuit porcelain. And the special name of this porcelain has a special firing process. This is direct enameling on biscuit porcelain, and it has one firing process. If you look at this mountain, it has a Taoist feature, and the Taoist feature is the fact that you bring nature indoors. There's a connection with nature. And if you wanted to do calligraphy, philosophizing, you could watch this mountain in your indoor setting and got inspiration from it. In the mountain, you see the central gate that you can enter, and there's a staircase all the way around the mountain. And at every little pavilion, you can sit down, enjoy the view, contemplate, think about life, until at the top part, there's the pagoda, and then you reach the heaven, the Peng Lai. There's an incredible story about this mountain that the first time I ever traveled to China with my aunt and uncle in the early 90s, we visited the city of Guilin. And Guilin is famous for the Li River and the special mountains you see in the region. And this is a copy of a real mountain. And when we were driving around Guilin, there was still the early beginnings of the opening of China. And there was not so much to see. And we discovered an old palace in the center of Guilin. And we went indoors. And behind the palace, in the garden, was a huge mountain like this. And we climbed the mountain. I'm afraid of heights, but I did it. I reached the top of a real enamel on biscuit mountain. And
well, it wasn't really enamel on biscuit, presume.
It was in rock, of course, but I reached heaven despite my fear. I conquered my fear, and I climbed a real mountain like this. Famous example of a mountain like this mountain here, you can find, for instance, in the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam.
So how would they make this? Would this be fired in one go, or would it be...
This is fired in one go. It is a clay base, of course, and it's all bits, lumps of clay that you put together with the pavilions, the pagoda, and then it would be fired in one process.
And then the colour? The glazes?
It's all one
Wasn't
process.
it muffled? Wasn't it in the muffle kiln?
It's
I
not.
thought it was first biscuit fired and then...
No.
Okay.
Maybe you can tell us
Yes.
something about
in Jingdezhen was one big centre. There's one other sort of interesting centre of porcelain production, which was in Dehua in Fujian province in the south. And there they made these famous all-white wares, such as these cups. And these cups, wine cups, are one of the sort of items they produced. If you have a look behind me, you also see some Guanyin figures. So they were sort of famous for their ritual wares and wine cups, and also Buddhist and other religious figures. And it's very creamy white in colour, and that is because the clay they had there was this colour, so they were able to produce these really interesting all-white wares. And then the other piece next to me is this blue and white. Now, I know yesterday we spoke quite at length about blue and white porcelain, But Kangxi is also, apart from the Ming, also very, very famous for its blue and white porcelain. So the pure white body, the violet blue colour of the decoration. So you see here in relief this rather large bowl with flowers, and these panels have little animals in them as well.
Just to show you, we
Yes.
were talking about blanc de Chine porcelain.
The colour difference.
Look at the difference in white. This is from Dewa, this is from the famous city
So
of
this is
Yingticheng.
also white. If you look at it in
Yes.
itself, you see very white, but here you see the other one is slightly more creamy in colour than this one.
This, by the way, is a typical object that the Dutch East India Company would trade with the Chinese, bring to Holland and sell off into Europe. It also has beautiful sound.
Yes, so it's very glassy and thick. It's actually quite heavy, this one as well,
Yes.
isn't it? Compared to these, which are sort of quite light and translucent in colour.
Are there any questions on the live chat?
Yes, we've got a couple. We've got a question from Frank, and he asks, are there any objects that were made for the Chinese internal market, and did some of these objects ever reach Europe?
Yes,
yes.
both, I
Both.
think. So yes, there were definitely objects made for the internal market. There were actually two streams. So you had the imperial commanded porcelain in the imperial factories, and then you had the factories making the porcelain especially for Europe. So there were definitely two things, but the quality, as opposed to crackware, which we spoke to yesterday, in Kangxi, the export wares were of a really high quality, as were the imperial wares as well.
The problem is, dear viewers, that we can, there's so much we cannot tell you about this period and the
no
Kangxi
time.
porcelain, because so much was going on. So it's just a trifle of what we can tell. Are there any more questions?
Yes. Caroline asks, is it true that the yellow porcelain was reserved for the emperor and also in this period, and or were there other colors in this period?
The yellow was actually very for imperial. So literally, I was just looking at a book, and there was a whole etiquette about which level or which rank in the imperial palace could use which colors and which color combination. But the deeply all yellow porcelain was generally reserved for the emperor and the empress, and well, yes. So that was yellow was obviously, perhaps a lot of people haven't heard this, we haven't mentioned it, but bright yellow and the 5-clawed dragons were both the color and the symbol of the emperor.
Okay, I've got another one.
Yep.
And this one is from Meta, and she would like to know if the cups and the bowls would have been used, and if so, for what?
Would you like to answer this one?
Yes, of course, in the end, you can use the Chinese porcelain to drink, to put flowers, whatever. But in the end, most pieces, when they arrived in Europe, they were for display only.
They were so expensive.
Yeah,
right?
the value was already of such height that you would not use it as daily utensils to drink from, to eat from.
In Europe.
In Europe. A bowl like this, you, for instance, would come to Holland, to Amsterdam, would be bought by a rich merchant on one of the canals, and you would put this in your Wunderkammer, your treasure room, and you could show off and say, look, this comes from the other side of the world. This is from China, where people are yellow and they're barbarians. And it is now here in the room
So
with
it was
us.
very exotic. But I think in China, coming back to the yellow, I think there are different sorts of porcelain. Some were really unusual, highly specialized. They were for collecting, and they were also for use. So there were different sort of categories which could be used by the imperial family or the palace. So some of it would have been used, and some of it, especially in Europe, would have been purely for display.
Any more questions?
Yes, we've got one more, and this one's for you, Floris. What's your favorite object in the room?
My favorite object. This is, of course, the
Yeah,
object
very.
standing next to me. But talking about Chinese porcelain, there is a favorite object I have, and I will show you.
Oh, yes. I love this.
This is my favorite object of the moment. This is Chinese porcelain, of course, made in the Kangxi period. And this is a scroll weight. If you want to do calligraphy, you have to unroll your paper scroll. And of course, we know it's like wallpaper. If you want to put wallpaper on the wall, the roll will roll up. This is to block the roll, prevent it from closing. And I think this is so elegant and so chic if you can use this to block a scroll. Look at the way it's made. It's a rectangle. There are these slabs of clay made separately, put together. Look at the top end. But also the surprise is the bottom part.
Yeah, it's totally different from the rest.
Yeah, we call
and
this
the top of the branch.
Yes, and then in the end, before firing, they will add this separately made branch. It almost looks like real wood. It has different colors of enamel. The feeling is wonderful. The glaze, if you feel the glaze, it's quite heavy because it has to block
Interestingly,
the roll.
The glaze colors, so in the Kangxi period, famille verte, so the green enamels, they got great control on how to manage the firing of these green enamels, which are very unstable, so that by lowering the temperatures of the kilns, they could have all these huge variations in colors, and that was very much developed in the Kangxi period. So the green enamels, just like the plate you were just holding, so this plate here, it's also in the green colors.
For
See
me,
the little label here.
this would be the ideal Christmas gift. You can put this under the Christmas tree for me.
Really?
Yes.
Anybody else? For all your Christmas gifts?
Are there any more questions on the live chat?
No, that was it.
So,
Maybe you can...
what would you like me to say?
No.
So tomorrow we'll be talking, so this is Kangxi, and obviously it is not exhaustive. We can't tell you everything because there's so much that we could talk for days about this. We were talking about one object in 5 days instead of 5 objects in 5 days. But so this is basically just skimming Kangxi, and tomorrow we'll be talking about the 19th century, which is politically a very interesting period in China, and not so talked about ceramic-wise. So we'd like to cover that. So
thank you for watching today. Our live stream. All the information and the objects of that we've shown here are visible on the website. We hope to see you tomorrow, day 5, the last day, 19th century, short history of Chinese ceramics.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.